Hey, sisters and brothers, welcome to week 55 of Read Through the Bible in 2 years. If you recall, we have taken a break from reading the history of God's people that started way back in Genesis and continued through the second book of Kings. And now we are including the books of the prophets, especially those books of the prophets that have to do with this particular part of the history of God's people. And so a couple of weeks ago, we began the reading of the prophet Amos, and then the prophet Hosea, and then the prophet Micah. And now we are entering into the prophet Isaiah. Now, Isaiah is the longest book of the book of prophets. It is 66 chapters long and really can be divided up into at least two parts. Chapters 1 through 39 have to do with this part of the history of God's people. This part of Isaiah is written towards people of the 8th century BC. And then the second part, chapters 40 through 66, we'll read at a later time. And that has to do with what happens to God's people as they are ready now to come home from their exile to Babylon. And we'll cover that when we are in the middle of that part of the history of God's people. This part of Isaiah is interesting. And one of the readings that you'll read this week is the reading that comes from Isaiah chapter 6. It's in the midst of a story that you may have heard of, where this call of Isaiah, where Isaiah looks up and he sees the throne room of God open up to him, and he knows he shouldn't be there. He says, I'm a man of unclean lips, from a people of unclean lips. I shouldn't be here. And God provides a means by him to be here. He takes and orders one of the angels to come and take a live coal and touch his lips. And he says, now you are a man of clean lips. Do not say that you are no longer a man of unclean lips. And then God gives Isaiah a call to go and speak to God's people. And Isaiah says, well, what should I say to them? And this is what God says. He says, say this to my people. Keep listening, but do not comprehend. Keep looking, but do not understand. Make the mind of this people dull and stop their ears and shut their eyes so that they may not look with their eyes and listen with their ears and comprehend with their minds and turn and be healed. You see, if you recall, God's people in this section of their history are hopelessly addicted to idolatry, to the worship of false gods, those false gods of the tribes that surround them. And God has tried so many different kinds of things to break them of this addiction. And finally, there's only one thing left, is to allow them to touch bottom, to allow them to live out the consequences of their addiction. And this is exactly what happens in this part of the history of God's people. The empire of Assyria comes and conquers the northern kingdom of Israel and virtually dismantles it, destroys it. And then about 120 years later, the empire of Babylon comes and destroys Jerusalem and hauls so many of its people into exile in Babylon. And there it will nearly destroy the people of God. It will nearly erase them from history. And God says this is the only way that that addiction to idolatry will be broken, is to allow you to touch bottom. So the New Testament reading continues with the Gospel of Luke, and where you'll be reading now chapters 6 and 7 and 8, where God continues to show God's heart through his son Jesus Christ in this ministry now in the healings and the teachings to the people of Israel. So thank you. Thank you for your continued persistence in reading through the Bible in 2 years. May it continue to deepen your knowledge of Scripture, and more importantly, may it continue to deepen your love of this God who speaks to us through Scripture. Thank you.